our mid-season
F1 driver
rankings.
Oh, Tommy, it's felt like so long since we sat here chatting about Formula One. The summer break is, of course, well and truly underway. And we are here to bring you our averages over the course of the season so far, which I'm sure will appease and please everybody.
Yeah, it's, a well-known series that everyone agrees with. So to have basically our order is very good. And the best thing about it is that we do it in a way where it is unbiased, no recency bias here. We actually grade all the averages, so it's very easy to look at a driver that may be doing terribly now or really good now and forget they had a stinker or a really good start to the season.
Exactly, that's the thing, right? Because I'm sure there are some drivers that have had an absolute worldie 3 or 4, 5 last races, but this is taken into account the whole season.
We've got to remember when Ferrari were good, right?
Great. How long are we doing that? We were recording for only a minute or so. Thank you so much for that. Anyway, let's dive straight into it, shall we? And begin with 20th position. Is it 20th? Technically 21st, no?
Well,
what are we doing about that?
I'd left it for the end, but we can mention it now. Ollie Behrman. We'll give him let's give him his props, yeah, because he would have won. Because of course he did one race, and we both gave him a 10. So he technically has the best average grade of the entire thing. So
congratulations, Ollie Behrman.
Well done, Ollie Behrman.
10 out of 10. Let's get into our full grid, full-time drivers, starting with 20th position. And the driver coming out in 20th for myself is Logan Sargent with a score of 4.0. Am I surprised to see this? No. His best score from myself was a 7 out of 10 at Silverstone, where he got a P11. And his worst was in Canada, where he got a 1 from me, where he went off and then crashed out later as well, DNF'd. But generally, obviously with a 4.0, it's not been the best of seasons. And what I would say from here on in, second half of the season, just enjoy it, Logan, because Williams have turned their back on him now. You're pretty much done. They've not announced he's leaving, but they've signed 2 drivers, so he's gone, sadly. So just enjoy the second half of the season, Logan, is what I'd say.
So P20 for me is also Logan Sargent. I have been much more generous and given him 4.1 out of 10 average. Yes, he has not had the best season. This was his opportunity, of course, to turn things around, which he hasn't done. I think the problem was not only has he still not had the better of Alex Albon in any race, maybe he has done less so now, but still spent a lot of the first half of the year crashing, and that's why there's been a lot of discussions of was he going to get replaced mid-season. But yeah, I gave him a 7 as well at Silverstone, which is his best performance when he finished P11. But then even in that race, the Williams was quite good and Alex got a P9, but you can argue that's where he should be compared to Alex Albon, just a couple of places down. The only positive is he is P20 in the championship, so not last.
Ahead of Valtteri Bottas. Let's go to 19th position.
So P19 for me is Zhou Guanyu with 4.6. Quite a big step up from Logan, which maybe shows kind of how disastrous Logan's season's been. His best score was a 9 out of 10 from me in Bahrain. Again, a drive with no points. That was a P11 finish. But we've been, I think, in particular, the most recent races where he's got a lot of 3. I've given him a lot of 3 out of 10s. And it's just mainly just the fact that he's just not doing anything, and he's consistently... I know the Sauber is terrible, but he is consistently so poor in qualifying in particular. Even with the financial backing that he's got, it's not going to be enough for him to be considered for a seat next year either. So not a good season for Zhou.
Not at all. For me, 19th position is also Zhou Guanyu with a whopping 4.7 out of 10. So 0.1 more generous than Tommy. The worst score I gave him was a 2 in Canada, where, it just was a race to forget, or race weekend to forget for him. Similar to you, Tommy, I give a lot of 3s, a lot of 4s for Zhou. Obviously, it is a step up from Logan. Like a 0.6, 0.7 step up is actually, as you will see as we go up these rankings, a big step from that. But, it's just been a poor season. I gave him a 9 as well in Bahrain. where he finished 11th. I gave him 7s in China and Spain, where he finished 14th and 13th. So there's been enough crazy races level, in order to have... What's that?
That's Sauber's level, sadly, but...
Yeah. But there's been enough crazy races in order for him to have snuck another 9 or a 10 out of 10 where he's finished in a 9th or a 10th place. But sadly for Sauber, they've not scored any points whatsoever. So, yeah, disappointing for Zhou, and that's why I've got him in 19th position. 18th. Now, this is wild to me, but also not in some ways. Sergio Perez is in 18th with 4.7, tied with Zhou, but he places higher because he's been given 2 9 out of 10s from me. I'm not going to get into his season because we've spoken about it so much. But some I guess highlights and lowlights from what I've picked out through my ratings throughout the year. He's got a 4.7 and yet had a really strong start to the season. I gave him an 8 in Bahrain, a 9 in Saudi and Japan, where he finished second in both of them, 7s in China and Miami, and yet he's got an average of a 4.7, which just shows you just how low we've scored him after that, because that's when the dip kicked in with Imola, getting a 3 there. He got a 0 in Canada from me. Hungary obviously redeemed himself slightly and finished 7th, which was a decent drive from 16th on the grid. Still is one of the worst drivers of the season, sadly, even with that strong start. And there's no more to say about Perez.
P18 for me is also Sergio Perez with the same, a 4.7. No surprise that it looks very similar to you. Yeah, you look at the start of the season and it's strange because it feels so long ago that he had that form. There's obviously a lot of argument that even with that form, that was when Max was winning races by 25 seconds and Perez was finishing second. Now, with Perez finishing 25, 30 seconds behind Max, that of course equates to a very poor points tally, which he's got. You look at the start of the season, and from me, he got 8, 9, 5, 9, 7, 7, and then it goes 3, 2, 0, 3, 3. What, like, his form has just hit a cliff, and Frank agrees. Frank has basically gone, we don't need to hear about Perez again.
Let's go to 17th position then, shall we?
So P17, Kevin Magnussen with a 5.2. Now, Kevin Magnussen is a funny one because middle of this season, we thought it was a complete slam dunk that he was going to get banned at some point. I actually gave him 2 zeros, one in Miami and one in Monaco. Magnussen had a very poor kind of few races where it really did look like he was going to get a race ban, but then he has had some strong performances, and with Haas we've been able to see a much better season from them because they haven't had that complete calamitous car that just falls back in the races. So that is why he has been able to bag 5 points. It's not a huge amount, but obviously there's not been many points dished out because of the top drivers. So
my 17th position is Lance Stroll with a 5.1. I think it's pretty fair that he's in this region of drivers. It's not been a great season for Stroll. He's had a few decent drives. I gave him an 8 out of 10 in places like Bahrain, Canada and Silverstone. And yeah, I'd say more recently he's had better drives for sure. Like, he's been around where Alonso's been. Alonso's maybe had a bit of a dip, I would say, at the same time. But he also had some pretty massive stinkers in the earlier parts of the season. The lowest grade I gave him was in China, where I gave him a 1 out of 10, where he just drove into the back of Ricciardo. Let's go to 16th then. For me, Kevin Magnussen with a 5.4 rating. The best rating I gave for him was a 9 in Austria, where he finished in 8th. I gave him a 0 as well in Monaco because it was... I know Perez did have a part to play in that, but I'm very much still on the opinion that K-Mag was at fault for that and how he did not get penalty points. He didn't get any, did he? For that, it was deemed a racing incident, right?
Yes, he got none,
which is
despite
utterly
all
bizarre.
needing just a few to push him over the edge.
But also, I should have given him a 10 because that allowed for Charles Leclerc to easily win the Monaco Grand Prix. So Magnussen, I also gave him a 1 in Miami, which is quite funny because obviously that was one of the, what do you call it, dirty, dangerous, or just pure didn't care about the rules? Probably the latest of those three. And then I've given him a few 7s across the season as well. But yeah, I mean, despite those few standouts, yeah, he's had a few stinkers as well, which has caused him to be 16th.
So 16th for me is Lance Stroll on a 5.3. Similar to Perez, but the other way, in the fact that for me, a lot of his bad grades were at the start of the season, where I think a lot of the grades are more just the frustration and fed up when actually, bizarrely, when Alonso's doing a brilliant job, Stroll is having an absolute nightmare. For instance, the Saudi crash and slamming into the back of Ricciardo in China, like you mentioned, and then blaming Ricciardo and just being absolutely ridiculous. But as the Aston Martin ironically has got worse, Lance Stroll's performances have got better, and whether that's because Fernando Alonso's getting worse or the car's now more suited to where Stroll likes it, of course, because he is the driver they build the car around, of course.
He's the reason they are existing.
Exactly. So he's got a few 8 grades and 7s recently.
15th position, Tommy.
I've gone for Valtteri Bottas with a 5.5. He's P15 and he's last in the championship, but he's 15th in our hearts. No, he's he's a very difficult driver to grade because
that is mad, by the way, that he's 15th. When I look at his results, which are 19th, 17th, 14th, 14th, retired, 16th, 18th, 13th, 13th, 16th, 16th, 15th, 16th, 15th.
Exactly. And he's always
ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, but he's normally, for the most part, higher than his teammate. He does a brilliant job in qualifying, which we know he's very good at. But unfortunately in the races, and this is the part of Formula One when for the majority, not all teams, that you can have a brilliant performance in qualifying, but over a 60-70 lap race or whatever, the performance kind of levels itself a bit more and you get a bit closer. But Bottas is only last in the championship because he's not been able to have a standout strong result, and that's why he's behind Logan. Logan's 11th place is what actually,
yeah.
And Joe's 11th place as well. So Bottas hasn't even got close to the points, but is P15 and not actually driving that badly. But that is Formula One.
My 15th place is also Valtteri Bottas with a 5.6. The lowest grade I gave him was a 4. I think he just had a very quiet season, apart from maybe in China, where I gave him a 9. But then even that, I think that was, he retired, didn't he? But he was running really well. Yeah, he's just had such a quiet season where I'm giving him 5s, maybe 6s when he's beaten Zhou by an absolute country mile. But that is all that he can do in that Sauber, and I think going about his job quite quietly and not being involved in too many incidents or that sort of stuff, he's being placed higher than the ones that are having these peaks and troughs, mainly troughs at this stage of the rankings, and that's why he's 15th. And I think he deserves to be there. I don't think he's driving badly. Let's go to 14th position then, and mine is Daniel Ricciardo with a 5.8. Oh, Danny. I think he's had a tale of two halves, I'd say, with this season. The first half, pretty shocking. Lowest grades I gave him were a series of 3s in Saudi Arabia, Australia, Japan. And the highest grades I gave him were in Miami, where I gave him an 8. Same for Canada, same for Austria and Belgium. So yeah, it's a difficult one. And I think had he just put together what he's done in the last few races across the season, he may well be sat in a Red Bull seat right now. We don't know. I mean, Helmut Marko literally said if he was outperforming Yuki, which he hasn't, then he may well have got that call up. Yeah, 14th position I think is fair because he hasn't been as good as Yuki Tsunoda over the course of this season. He's had some highlights, but not enough of them.
Daniel Ricciardo is also 14th for me with 5.6. I think Daniel's season, it all comes to that kind of point at the start of the season, quite early in the season. If you look at Yuki Tsunoda, where he was bagging points, finishing best of the rest constantly, and Daniel Ricciardo was finishing races in 12th, 15th, 13th, 12th. Of course, had that amazing sprint result, but then didn't deliver in the main race, like you say. He kind of had that Red Bull seat, what felt like destined for him, that all he had to do was beat Yuki Tsunoda, and he hasn't. And he's definitely doing a lot better now, but unfortunately for him, it was just not enough to essentially drive the Constructors' Championship winning car for now, as it's falling further back into the pack.
13th position, Tommy.
13th is Alex Albon with 6.1. Albon is a funny old driver because he's not scored many points. A couple of P9s, that is the only points he's got on the board. Williams haven't had those high highs like they did last year. He was, of course, I want to say definitely in a lot of people's top fives of driver of the year last year. He hasn't had those moments this year. Now, whether that's that the car's not as good, it's going to be certainly a lot more interesting when we see Sainz alongside him to see just how good he is. But he hasn't really had those incredibly incredible moments like he was delivering last year. So he's had a fairly quiet season, but certainly not a bad one.
My 13th position is Esteban Ocon with a 5.9. He had some high grades from me in Miami and Spa with some 9 out of 10s, where he scored points in both of those. Spa especially was incredibly impressive with all of those overtakes that he made. And then sadly for him, I think this is where it's impacted him quite heavily, I think, for both of our grades when we eventually get to Ocon for you, is that that 0 that he got in Monaco, because of how close these ratings are now in this pack of drivers, it's put him towards the rear of this midfield for me. Because he's not had, I'd say he's had on par the same kind of season as Gasly, but he's had that one massive dip which has affected his grade quite a lot, because I think they've both had 4-point scoring finishes, if I'm not mistaken. It's not been a bad season by any stretch for Ocon, but yeah, he's 13th for me, and as the Alpine improves, I'm sure he will continue to score more points in the second half of the season. 12th position, I have his teammate Pierre Gasly with a 6.2. The worst grade I gave him was a 4 in Bahrain, where he qualified 20th and finished 18th. A few 5s and then some standouts in Monaco and Canada, where I gave him 8s. His best grade that I gave him was a 9 in Spain, where he finished P9 after qualifying in a sensational 7th place. He's had a lot of bad luck as well, though, which obviously has impacted, not his grade because we didn't give him a 0, but it hasn't affected his average, has it? The ones where he's had some really bad luck.
Yeah. P12 for me is Esteban Ocon with 6.1, which is exactly the same score as Albon. He got the same number of 9s from me as Albon, the same number of 8s, but had more 7 grades. That's how close it was between Ocon and Albon for me. Completely agree with you that with these, especially when you're looking at it's over half the season, but we've obviously still got a few races to go. 1-0 can really knock your grade now, and I think Ocon has delivered a very good season. He's taken what is an awful car, same with his teammate Gasly, and delivered points from it when I don't think maybe some of the other drivers in the lower half of Formula 1 might not have got what those guys would have got out of that Alpine. So done a very good job there. He's shown quite a few times this year why someone like Haas, despite what people on social media think of him being washed and terrible, and I think a lot of it is banter, but that he does deserve to be there because he is a very capable and quick driver, and that's why he's got some 9s and 8s as well.
Absolutely, completely agree. Let's go to 11th place now.
11th for me is Pierre Gasly with 6.2. Like a lot of their lives, these two are can't separate them too much, and Gasly has been very similar to Ocon. He's not had the low that Ocon had at Monaco, but his drive, I gave him a 10 in Spain actually for that drive, which I believe was the P9, where he finished brilliantly and did a really good qualifying as well. So it's very, very, very similar to Ocon. You can say all the things you said about Ocon with Pierre Gasly, that unfortunately Ocon and Gasly are two much more capable drivers than that car. They deserve a lot better, and it's difficult to grade them a lot of the time because they are just not doing much. But I think the fact that Gasly and Ocon consistently are almost always together shows that they are maximising what they are doing in that car.
My 11th place is Alex Albon with a 6.2, tied with Gasly, but placed higher because I've given Albon 2 9 out of 10s. And they were in Monaco and Silverstone, where he finished 9th. My worst grade for him was a 4 out of 10 in Spain, and then a lot of 5s and 6s. The Williams, again, not being particularly great for most of the season. And I think Albon's still driving very well. I think he deserves to be in this sort of 11th place that I've given him with the averages. It's just hard for him to do much more. Like, he beats his teammate every single race weekend, and I know that it's Logan Sargeant, he's not that great, but you can't compare him to anything else. So that's why I've given him a lot of 6 out of 10s, and when he's put half a minute on his teammate, you can't just ignore that and give him a 5 or a 4. So 6.2 out of 10 for me with Albon. Let's go to 10th position. And mine is Fernando Alonso with a 6.6 out of 10. So now we are into the top 10. This is where it's pretty close between a lot of drivers. My best grades for Fernando, I gave him a 9 in Saudi, Japan, Canada and Belgium, and a worst grade of 2 out of 10 in Imola, where he finished 19th and did have an absolute stinker in Imola. The first glimpse since Alonso returned, I would say, of a... Oh, Fernando's not having that much fun anymore. And we're seeing a few weekends creep in now where he's not demolishing Stroll, which is confusing in my brain. I know, Tommy, you have your theories as to why perhaps the Stroll-Alonso divide is closing, and it's because they think that you think that the car is being more suited to Stroll. But either way, Fernando just hasn't been completely and utterly on it, I would say, in this second half of the season, which is why he's been bumped down to 10th, because I'd say in that first half of the season he was looking like a top 3, top 4 driver again, but no, 10th for me.
P10 is also Fernando Alonso with a 6.6, so despite my biased Fernando Alonso grades, we've ended up with the same score. It's very similar to... it's exactly what you've said. He at the start of the season, it looked like Aston Martin delivered not as good of a car as last year. Obviously, he's not been able to get those podiums and really high points finishes, but they were in Formula A, and then they were hanging on to Formula A, and now they very much don't feel part of Formula A at all. Ever since Aston Martin have struggled, it has been Alonso that has struggled, and he's got some very bad grades as well. Like you say, in Imola, in Austria, where he had contact with, I think it was Zhou, when he dived up the inside. So he's put a few clumsy moves in as well, which made me think is a bit of desperation and frustration that the car's not where he wants it to be, particularly when you look at how good the Aston Martin was. And this time last year we were talking about, Fernando Alonso, it's going to be great when he gets win 33, and now that just looks a million miles away.
Let's go to 9th position then, Tommy.
So 9th for me is Yuki Tsunoda with 6.9 average score out of 10. Nice. He's had a very strong season, particularly at the start when we mentioned Daniel Ricciardo maybe not delivering, and Yuki had so many performances where he was finishing best of the rest. We say that Formula A is untouchable, and Yuki Tsunoda was the guy that was always topping Formula B for a good run of races. 7th in Austria, 10th in Japan, 7th in Miami. He still has, unfortunately, those moments which maybe Red Bull think twice about, when he bins it into the wall and has a big crash. And while he's still new, he's not new anymore that he can really lean back on that excuse that he's a brand new driver.
When you said that, I just had the worst dad joke of you talking about the Teletubbies then, but anyway, it's fine.
Do it. I know. New was the vacuum, right?
Yeah, just came straight to it. Just, give me some of that tubby toast. Don't know what I'm talking about now. Let's get into my 9th as well, because it is also Yuki Tsunoda with a 6.9. Nice. Best grades were, for me, 10s in Australia, where he finished 7th, and then Japan, where he finished 10th. The worst grades I gave him were 4s in China, Canada and Spain. I also gave him 9 out of 10s in Miami, Monaco and Hungary. I think Yuki's been fantastic this year. As you've mentioned, Tommy, I think that he has had moments that sadly haven't been erased from his game yet. If we just constantly saw a Yuki Tsunoda topping Formula B, I don't think that Red Bull would be able to come up with an excuse to not give him at least a shot. Or they wouldn't even need an excuse, right? It seems like right now, as you constantly say every time on the Race podcast, that Christian Horner's never looking when Yuki Tsunoda's in the top 10, but as soon as he is, he's awake and he's seeing everything. I think that I don't know. There's something that just doesn't feel as though Red Bull will ever go for Yuki Tsunoda, and that's why he's been tipped to Aston Martin in the future and stuff like that. And perhaps that door will close. We don't know. 8th place for me, Nico Hülkenberg with a 7.3 out of 10. Hulk has been brilliant this year. He really has. He's also got 22 points, the same as Yuki. And you compare that to his teammate Magnussen, who's got 5. He's had some stellar performances in the likes of Austria, Silverstone, consecutive P6s. He's just been really good for a lot of the year. He does extract everything, and he is one of the best midfield drivers that we've seen in Formula 1, I would say, because he's always there, whether it was with Renault or whoever, Force India, whatever. So yeah,
the names you're saying is never. He's never had a race-winning car. It's all right going, but the fact is that when he's bottled podiums, it's because he was absolutely somehow running first in a Force India. So you can't. Exactly. It's not like he's got a Red Bull drive and then been terrible. Nico Hülkenberg is also P8 for me with a 7.1. Maybe hasn't had as good of those like unbelievable qualifying things, but what's great is that he can now deliver in the races. And that's what we love to see. Like, he has been good in qualifying, but last year he would always drop back down, whereas now he's able to actually stay there. And you actually look at where he's finished, even when he's not in the points. 5 of those are P11, so he does get good amount from that car. Delivered some amazing results. I mean, his 2 back-to-back 6th in a Haas is actually phenomenal.
Let's go to 7th place.
7th place for me is George Russell. I think it's going to be very close between a lot of these drivers now, and can go either way. I think we might see a bit of a mixed order. Maybe look at 7th and go, oh, that's a bit harsh, but he is close to the others. Austria, brilliant drive, has to be said. I know he inherited a win, and of course gave him a 10 as well for Spa, despite the disqualification, which was very unfortunate, but a fair grade. Still has had the odd moment of madness. I think that he did a dive bomb, for what I remember, on Piastri in Japan that was a bit like, chill out. But at the start of the season, he was very impressive and maybe didn't get the credit he deserved for just how impressive he was and how much ahead of Hamilton he was, and his qualifying score particular against Lewis Hamilton.
My 7th position is Lewis Hamilton with a 7.4 out of 10. And I think it's worth mentioning that my 6th is 7.5, my 5th is 7.6, my 4th is also really 7.6. So it's very close in this span from 4th to 7th. But look, I think that this reflects for me, this 0.1, 0.2 difference that I've got with Hamilton now down in 7th compared to maybe being in 4th is the start of the year where George Russell was doing a great job and beating Hamilton in some of those races. Like, for example, a bad grade came from me. I say bad, 4 out of 10 in Australia, where he DNF'd. So it was difficult to really judge much from that, but he did qualify P11. And then the best grades, the things that have really brought up his score, of course, Silverstone, Belgium gave him 10 out of 10s. It's been an upward trajectory. I mean, his results, the last 5 races have been 3rd, 4th, 1st, 3rd, 1st. As a reminder, this is a whole season perspective, and I think this might be the one where people go, what do you mean? Hamilton's been incredible this year. Not over the course of the whole season.
Yeah, read the first.
Yes.
Read his first ones.
Exactly. So 7th, what did he have?
9th.
7th, 9th, retired. 9th with a 2nd in the sprint for China. 6th, 7th. So that's a lot of sort of decent points, but well, not even decent points. 3 of them are 9th. So yeah, that's why I've got Hamilton at 7.4. 6th position, I have got Carlos Sainz with a 7.5. Carlos at the start of the year was incredible. Of course, he got a 10 in Australia after coming back with his appendicitis. Of course, Saudi Arabia, where we didn't give him a score at all, did we? So it didn't affect his averages. And then it's been a decent season for Carlos. He's picked up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 podiums. A bit of a come a cropper of the Ferrari just getting a little bit slower, and he's scored some very solid points, and he's not been far off Leclerc, sometimes been faster than him, especially at the start of the year. So yeah, 6th place for me, 7.5, a decent grade, and I can't believe he's going to Williams next year.
Carlos is 6th for me with a 7.6 For me, his worst result was Canada, but his form at the start of the year was incredible. His win in Australia put him on the talk of like, oh, he is the man that everyone's going to want. And instead, he's at Williams next year. He doesn't really have many low lows. Essentially, other than that retirement, his worst finish is a P6. Even on his off days, he delivers a very strong result.
5th position.
So in 5th place, I have Lewis Hamilton with 7.6, which is the same as Sainz, but he's got 2 10s. It's funny that, George Russell for me is 7th, Hamilton 5th, so 2 grades higher, but it's only 0.1 out of 10, which shows how maybe evenly matched over the whole season they actually have been. For me, Hamilton's second, it's not even second half, it's just he's been so good in the last 5 races. He has been absolutely sensational and delivered the maximum out of his car every time. Getting 2 wins in 3 races is something we never thought was going to happen when he was finishing 7th and 9th every race. So
my 5th place is Charles Leclerc with a 7.6, and I note that Tommy has not yet said Charles Leclerc, so I will not have anyone saying I am blinded by fanboyism when I have given him a lower average score. I mean, he's still driving really well. He's still getting a lot of great results. His worst race was obviously Silverstone, but I mean, he just had that run where I don't really feel like it was his fault what was going on, or at least, I mean, there were some parts to play where maybe he could have done better, Silverstone being one of them, hence why I gave him a 4, was because, he'd cooked his tyres, then he came in, and then obviously changed onto the Inters, and that wasn't the right way to go, and, you blinked, and then he'd been lapped, I think, in 3 of the 4 races more recently. So that aside, he's still there, getting some great results. Best race, and of course the 10 out of 10 was his win in Monaco, mostly given him 8s and 9s because he has been, I would say, extracting the most out of that Ferrari where he can, barring those 3 or 4 terrible races, but I think that's what has brought him down. 4th position, I have got George Russell. He's tied with Leclerc on 7.6, but is higher due to 2 10 out of 10s. So the worst grade I gave George Russell was a 5 in Australia, but the best grades were 10 out of 10s in Austria and Belgium, where of course Tommy's already mentioned those, and just pretty decent grades throughout most of the season. Of course, he's beat Hamilton by 0.2 for me. Of course, as I say, more recently Hamilton has been incredible, but let's not take anything away from George Russell either. I think he's had a great season. I do. Still, I think 4th place, a very lovely performance from George Russell.
4th for me is Charles Leclerc with a 7.7.
Fanboy.
So I know I am obviously the resident Charles Leclerc fanboy of this podcast. Yeah, he got 10s from me in Monaco and also Spa, where I feel like he delivered everything despite, of course, dropping back. But you look at his start of the year and it is funny how, despite Carlos having a sensational run, Charles Leclerc up until Monaco was getting the maximum out of that Ferrari every single weekend. But even with the way the car has not been as quick, it seems, and they're looking like they're the 4th fastest car now, Leclerc's still put in some good performances. So yeah, it's a good season for Charles, and this is why I like that we've done it through averages, because it's very easy to forget runs that certain drivers had at the start of the season and stuff, and Leclerc's was absolutely brilliant.
3rd place.
3rd for me is Lando Norris. A big surprise with an 8.1. Of course, his teammate has not been said yet, which is why it's a big surprise for me. I think this is a bit like an Ocon for me, where I graded him quite harshly. Some would say in Belgium. I think he massively underdelivered. He was, not himself, and made quite a few errors during the race. His best grade did come at Miami. Is that his only 10 that I've given him? It is. And Lando, for me, has maybe underdelivered what that McLaren is capable of, but equally at the same time, I think he's unfairly got a bit of a reputation of being like, I mean, it's classic internet that you can never just be like rational and say he's done a good job. It either has to be he's massively overrated or he's really underrated, because he got hyped up massively, and people saying that, oh, if he has the car, he will deliver. And I don't think, unfortunately, he has delivered what I thought he might with a car that good. but it's no way near as bad as what certain people are saying, like that he's like absolutely awful and way off. He deserves credit for delivering a good season and having the points tally he has. Yes, it should be more, and sometimes that's through McLaren, sometimes that's through his own fault, but we'll see how he does in the second half of the year. I think it's going to be a really big moment in Lando's career, I think, the second half of the season and how he performs.
Third place for me is Oscar Piastri with an 8.1. Oscar Piastri, of course, has had an amazing season. He is a 1.5 seasons into Formula One, and he's just growing with confidence and getting stronger by the day. Another season under his belt, and we could well see Piastri and Norris very close. Can Oscar even get past and faster than Lando? That's a question on a lot of people's lips. But I think Oscar, over the course of the whole season, has been great. I think his worst grade for me was in Spain with a 6 out of 10. Best rating, of course, 10 out of 10 in Hungary. I don't think he's been as good as Lando Norris over the course of the whole year. Of course, get recency bias into that and say, of course, he's been great in the last 3 or 4 races where he's finished second, fourth, first, second. And yes, he has been amazing, hence why he's got an 8.1 average grade. This is, what you were saying, Tommy. It isn't a case of Piastri being worse than Norris. It's that he hasn't had, just by a minute amount, as strong a season over the course of the last, from Bahrain to Belgium. Let's go to second place then. No surprise, it is Lando Norris for me with an 8.3. It's that final percent that Lando's been missing. Of course, I think McLaren in general come into this season with a bit of underdog mentality, not just within their team, which we've discussed before, but from fans' perspective as well. Oh my God, McLaren can challenge Red Bull. This is amazing. And I'm sure some of the grades, for example, Lando getting a 9 out of 10 in Australia for a third place, it does shift the way our expectations as we go through the season, and McLaren are quicker and quicker and quicker. Lando has had a great season. He's just been missing that final percent of challenging Max Verstappen. Max is so far clear in our average grades that's where the difference is. I don't think he deserves a 7 out of 10 average grade or anything like that, because he's had so many brilliant drives over the course of this year. But the highlights, the ones that we all remember, are him not being able to convert pole position, because they're in the limelight, they're in the spotlight, and this is what's brought up. And of course, we're going to discuss it because we'd love to see a fight with Lando and Oscar and McLaren against Max Verstappen and Red Bull.
So P2 for me is Oscar Piastri with 8.4, which is quite a bit higher than Lando, a surprising amount.
Whopping!
Yes, I would say whopping, but it is, I think Lando's...
8.3 is a whopping amount in these driver rankings.
I was surprised by it, but when I looked back on the season, I do think that it is actually a lot tougher to call between the two of them. Miami, as an example, I gave Oscar a 10 out of 10. He was ahead of Lando until, not taking anything away from Lando's victory. It was a sensational win, and I'm incredibly glad that he got that victory. But Oscar was ahead of him before the good fortune, which he finally deserved, because he's had a lot of bad fortune as well. Since McLaren got good in those last few races, it's been a lot closer. I think since Miami, Oscar has outscored Lando, which is another big surprise. And yeah, very excited to see how the two of them do in the next half of the season.
First place!
It is Max Verstappen. What a surprise. 9 out of 10. Exactly, which is pretty poor for Max's standards recently. Pretty washed, to be honest. Still a whopping clear of the others, and it's not been a perfect season from him like we expected. The car, we've still given him good grades, because I don't think the car is anywhere near as dominant as it was last year, but he has had his moments where Monaco didn't go to plan, Austria, Hungary, for example. Max is one of those drivers. I saw a lot of people maybe questioning our grade for him for Belgium, I think it was, and saying that he should be higher. Maybe. Sometimes drivers can be a victim of their own success, that because Max has been dominant for so long, you kind of feel like you can't give him a 9 or a 10 out of 10 for a P4. But as we go into the second half of the season, it's quite clear that Red Bull do not have anywhere near the advantage they did, and while I think it is it's going to take an absolute minor miracle for him not to win the championship with the points lead he's got, it's going to be very interesting by the end of the year seeing how he continues, because he's not won since Spain, which was the 23rd of June, which in Max Verstappen's dominance and all the banter about the Dutch national anthem being the F1 outro is a very, very, very long time.
My first position is, of course, Max Verstappen as well, with an 8.9 out of 10. And
hater.
Yeah, absolutely disgraceful
8
season
out of 10,
Max
shocking.
Yeah, 8.9. Still a 0.6 difference to second place, same as you. So he's clear. He's the best driver on the grid. He's able to extract everything most of the time. Of course, as we've mentioned, there are a few blips. And it hasn't been a perfect season, even though we expected it in Bahrain. But there's been still, how many has he won? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 races this season. And there'll be
every other
plenty
fan's
more.
like Crimea River, only 7 races.
Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be plenty more in the second half of the year. But yeah, he's still able to extract some great results, even if the Red Bull is now in the pack. So yeah, there's not what else you say about Max Verstappen. He's just unbelievable and the best driver on the grid at the moment. And that wraps up our driver rankings for the mid-season. Interesting, of course. No opinion. It wasn't like we've formulated this in terms of grading, like our own opinion of it. This is all averages. This is straight out of the driver rating system. My final thoughts are, I hope you enjoyed that. Of course, it's a whole season, well, mid-season averages. Let us know your thoughts. I know you will. And we will see you. And we will see you for, what we're going to do, predictions, aren't we, for the rest of the season. Some crazy predictions, which will be fun. And then we'll be back to Zandvoort. I hope you're all enjoying the summer break, and we'll see you soon. Lots of love. Bye.
Bye.